Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show. This is your host, Jason Hartman, where we talk about protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in these uncertain times. We have a great interview for you today, and we will be back with that in less than 60 seconds on the Holistic Survival Show. And by the way, be sure to visit our website at holisticsurvival.com. You can subscribe to our blog, which is totally free, has loads of great information, and there's just a lot of good content for you on the site. So make sure you take advantage of that at holisticsurvival.com. We'll be right back.
Here's your chance to catch up on all of those Creating Wealth shows that you've missed. There's a 3-book set with shows 1 through 60, all digital download. You save $94 by buying this 3-book set. Go ahead and get these advanced strategies for wealth creation. For more details, go to jasonhartman.com.
It's my pleasure to welcome Michael Margrave to the show. He's a Scottsdale, Arizona-based attorney specializing in business law and estate planning. And today we're going to talk about kind of a specialty topic, and that is the topic of a gun trust. Yes, you heard me right, a gun trust. Now, you've heard of a trust before, but how does it apply to guns and gun law and why this might be important to you? Michael, welcome. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing real fine. The weather's great out here in Arizona. As I look out the window, I'm inside working, but this is a good time of year out in Arizona.
It's very nice, very nice. Well, why would someone want to have a gun trust? I mean, well, maybe first, what is a gun trust?
Well, taking it back one step beyond that, the trust is a legal arrangement normally put down in writing, comprised of 3 parties. One party who creates the trust is called the trustor, the grantor, or the settlor. The party who manages the trust is called the trustee, and it could be also the same as the grantor or settlor. And then the third party to a trust is the beneficiary. So trusts have been common ever since about the year 1000 or so from in England, under the English common law. And, of course, our country was colonized by the British, and so we delved into the English common law as the base for our legal system. So every state here in the U.S. has laws governing the creation, management, and disposition of trusts. And to some extent, there is a uniform trust code that is across the board, although not all states have adopted that code, and oftentimes states will amend it, vary it, and so you really can't say that we have a common trust law across the U.S., although there are obviously trust created in one state is recognized in another state, and so forth.
But the laws do vary a little bit from state to state then.
Yes, they do. And so the gun trust is just a kind of a variation of that to serve a particular purpose. So using a general estate planning trust for holding of certain types of firearms probably won't work because it's not drafted with that in mind, and also the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is scrutinizing these trusts more now to see how they're put together and if they are sufficient to utilize. So how I came about this was here not too long ago. I had always wanted a John Wayne type of short barrel shotgun. I don't know if you saw El Dorado. I think James Caan was in there.
Is that shorter than I think the minimum length is 18 inches, right?
That's right. 18 is anything under 18 inches falls as in a different class called an NFA weapon or a Class 3 weapon. Anyhow, I decided to do that. So I started looking around on the internet for a short barrel shotgun, and I was talking to up at the gun shop that's not too far from my office, and the owner said, you know what? He said, you may just find it easier to make your own short barrel shotgun. And I said, what? And so he gave me a little education, and sure enough, it's possible and legal to do that, provided you follow all the procedures. So I did indeed, and I have a regular Winchester Model 24 16-gauge shotgun. So I proceeded down the path of getting the permission of the ATF to what they call make a firearm and then to have it registered, which entailed going to the chief local law enforcement officer, which is our famous Sheriff Joe Arpaio down here at Maricopa County. We got the fingerprints done, filled out a checklist sheet, and they took about 48, 50 days by the time I submitted everything to the time I got the little letter in the mail saying that I had passed muster. And I don't think it took that long due to my background, because I was thinking back, my last brush with the law was probably in 1970.
So you're a law-abiding citizen, but jump into the trust though. What does this have to do with it?
So one advantage of a trust is that, as provided in the regulations and in the ATF manual, if the approval of the chief of local law enforcement is not a requisite to obtaining a license or the registration of this gun and to make a short barrel shotgun. So that is one hurdle that you can avoid by using a gun trust. A second advantage of a gun trust is that you can pass it from generation to generation. And you can do that as long as the state law in your jurisdiction says that you can maintain a trust without having to terminate it. And I won't bore you with the rule about the rule against perpetuity.
Okay, got it. So the trust lives beyond the person, the owner. So that's good. So that allows you to pass it down. But what about that? Just repeat that first reason again. What was that? We're not talking about heirs and passing it on. What was that first reason again?
Well, the first reason is that normally you have to, if you apply to obtain or register a Class 3 or an NFA firearm, you have to get a sign-off from the chief local law enforcement officer that you've got basically a clean record. And so, which can take from jurisdiction to jurisdiction anywhere up to 60 days. And in some jurisdictions, just arbitrarily, some of the chief local law enforcement officers, just out of principle, refuse to consider or even act upon a request for a clearance.
Okay, but they'll do it for a trust, or you don't need to do this at all?
You don't need to do it for a trust.
Okay, so what do you do? You just go in and you buy the gun from a dealer, and the trust buys the gun.
Yes, it depends on what you're doing. If you're going to buy a gun that is already an NFA firearm, which I'm doing that process as well, there you acquire it and you file the form with the ATF in the name of the trust. And so you fill out the form, you give them a copy of the trust, ATF looks at the trust, sees if it meets their requirements, and after about 5 or 6 months, depending on if you're making a gun or just transferring title to an existing NFA weapon, hopefully you get back in the mail the form with the ATF stamp on it, permitting you to take possession of that gun or to alter it and to make it into a Class 3 firearm.
And so easier access to a gun you wouldn't normally have access to. What does NFA stand for?
The National Firearms Act. And so that was an act back in the 30s.
Right. And what else is an NFA weapon? Like the short barrel shotgun, but give us other examples.
Yes. I would recommend that if anybody's really interested, they go to the ATF handbook, which goes into great detail about all types of weapons. But let me give you 3 examples. If you have, I was describing, you have a regular shotgun, you want to reduce the length of the barrels under 18 inches or the overall length of the gun to 26 inches or less, if you need the permission of the ATF to do that. So that's that Form 1 you have to submit. They consider it. They look at everything. Why are you doing it? And then after about 5 months, you will either get back approval or they will reject it and tell you why they are rejecting it. A second example is a rifle. If you have a rifle and you wish to shorten the barrels to under 16 inches or overall length to under 26 inches, then you also need the approval. Or a third option is if you, I just recently are in the process of getting approval to take possession of a rather unique weapon. It's called the Ithaca auto and burglar gun. It's not a short barrel shotgun. It was made by Ithaca between 1925 and 33 as a short barrel weapon. So, interestingly enough, ATF doesn't classify it as a shotgun. It's any other weapon. And so that's how they classify it, as a smooth barrel rifle.
I see it on your website. It's pretty unique. It's a double barrel, little mini shotgun looking thing.
Yes,
yeah.
And if anybody wants to see it, it also appears on page 8 of the ATF handbook. It's right in the middle of the page, Ithaca Auto Burglar. It is really a cool thing. So those would be three types of weapons that would fit under this category. Then you have, like knife guns, umbrella guns, pen guns. You've got explosive devices, all sorts of things that we won't get into here. But if anyone wants to delve into it in that handbook, they'll certainly see a wide variety of firearms.
Okay, so one goes to, can they do a trust themselves, or do they need to go to an attorney? I have a feeling I know your answer on that. But
well,
how do they do it?
I know it sounds self-serving.
Right. No, it's okay.
Here's what's happening is that the ATF has been rejecting some of these trusts people will purchase online. The one trust that fits all jurisdiction probably doesn't have a lot of the language they like to see in a gun trust regarding restrictions and registrations, transfers and possession. And so probably it's wise to have an attorney draft it. And I would say, for example, like I don't do trust for people in other states who have no ties to Arizona. They should find a good attorney in their home state that at least it has some familiarity with gun trusts and go that route. Anybody in Arizona, I'm fair game.
So here's the question, though. How much does it cost and how long does it take to do this?
You mean to do the trust or just to get approval to have the gun? Okay.
I guess both, yeah.
Okay. I'll give you the two examples. If you're going to make a firearm, in other words, changing a long barrel shotgun to a short barrel shotgun. I was just talking to an ATF specialist last week, and the current timeline is in the vicinity of 5 months. The transfer, if you're seeking to buy a currently registered Class 3 or NFA firearm, that's going to take about a month longer, so that's currently running about 6 months. And part of that reason is that they only have 11 or 12 examiners, and so they have this huge backlog. So your application may sit there 4 months before they actually get to it and act upon it. They just hired 6 new examiners, I was told last week, and they are in the process of training, but will not be fully functional until sometime later this year as they're broken in, learn the rules, and so on and so forth. So that should ease up a little bit. So that's the approval process from that side. If you want to do a trust, then, obviously the attorney you go to, they probably have varying time schedules. Maybe somebody could do it in a couple of days. Maybe somebody's going to tell you, I'm so busy that it's going to take me a month before I get to your file. So you may inquire not only what it costs, but also how long is it going to take you, Mr. or Miss Attorney, to draft my gun trust? And then if you don't get the right answers, then you'll probably talk to somebody else.
Yeah, okay. Do you care to give us any guideline on pricing? Maybe what you charge. You can't speak for every other attorney.
No. And I could give a general, it's probably going to be in the range of $1,500. I've seen cases, though, where someone has, rather comprehensive drafting provisions that really take a lot of time to, it may be easy to verbalize what they want, but to put them in the right words and in the right sequence, it can take a lot of work. So there are cases where obviously it's going to be more than that, depending on the requirements of the client and how detailed they want to get and how complex they would.
And that would be in the case of a person who wants to make a gun, and when you say make a gun, you really mean modify a gun, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, there's some people, but they're licensed, and they have all the licenses to do that. I would just buy an existing gun, and what I will do then, hopefully in about a month, is when I get that approval, is to take the Winchester to a local gunsmith I've identified, who then looks at the form and the stamp and says, okay, I'm okay to do this, and does it, and I've identified somebody that I think I can work with that will do a good job. So personally, I'm not going to do it myself, but I have the authority to take it to a gunsmith.
Right.
To have
but you know, what about, I think that's probably fewer of our listeners that would be interested in that. What about for someone who just wants to acquire, some of these more unique, interesting guns? Maybe they're a collector, maybe they're doing it for a real defense type purpose. Then there's no drafting or complexity, right? Is it less expensive and faster that way?
Well, not from a trust standpoint.
Oh, okay.
It may be, and from the other form, I mean, someone can go to a gun dealer and who is licensed for Class 3 or NFA weapons and say, I would like to buy that shotgun, or I would like to buy this rifle or whatever, and they have to fill out the form and follow the form, pay the money, and submit it, and then bide their time while they're waiting to get approval. Like right now with my Ithaca auto burglar, I call it, I have a kind of a joke with the gun dealer that I have visitation rights on the weekend. I can go up and look at it, but that's about all I can do for another 4 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny. Now, is there any other benefit to this trust other than you outlined two benefits, it sounds like, right? Because I got to tell you, when I first heard of this, and our mutual acquaintance who booked you on the show here, my mind instantly went to everybody is concerned about these ridiculous shootings and these horrific things that many think, and not nutty people, by the way, I don't know what you think, but legitimate people that aren't crazy think that some of these things are staged, or the government's almost like complicit in them, or something just doesn't make sense. And they take it from an example, the concept of the false flag that's been around in the military forever, I guess, but from a similar type of event that happened in Australia, in Tasmania, about 12, 13 years ago, where they were able to enact very restrictive gun laws that made the civilian population, the law-abiding population, far less safe in Australia. And the government basically found a good excuse to do it. And it was a shooting. Now, I don't know where the outrage is from Pierce Morgan against drunk drivers or medical malpractice or all the things that kill many more people than a few horrific shootings every year. But I instantly went to the registration, at least historically, ultimately leads to confiscation. And that ultimately leads to oppression by governments. At least historically, we can say that. And that's what I was thinking, because the trust is its own entity. Is there a way that the trust is registered owning the firearms, but not the individual? That's where my mind kind of went when I heard of this.
Well, I think that the possible advantage of the trust is, for example, if you create a gun trust, obviously you're going to deal with any currently classified NFA weapons, or Class 3 sometimes called, like we've discussed, the short barrel shotgun, et cetera. But another possibility is that to also transfer in, and so that the trust owns, other weapons such as the AR-15s, which currently do not fall under the category of NFA firearms.
Not if Dianne Feinstein gets her way, though.
Well, that's true. So the thought is that it at least would give you a running start to grandfather your firearm into the trust, so that if subsequently they decide that they are going to ban AR-15s, it might be that they would only be banned from acquiring them from that point forward. So that if you had previously titled the AR-15 in your gun trust,
you could be grandfathered.
You might grandfather that in. That's not to say you might or might not have a fight, but you'd have a good shot at it. And
now, what about it? But that's usually those laws. They usually can't get away with making the laws retroactive. I mean, if an individual owns those, I met a guy once who owned, I don't know what kind of gun. I'm not a super knowledgeable guy in these guns, but he owned some kind of like military gun, and he said there's no way you could. And he was in the Socialist Republic of California, for God's sake. He said there's no way you could get this gun today. I can keep it because I already own it, but it's completely outlawed.
And what would happen, I suppose, is that the ATF would say, all right, anyone who has a current AR-15, for example, you can register it now and you're grandfathered in if you've got it in a trust or something. So all of that will have to unfold. But like with machine guns, you can still, they are fit in this category of these NFA weapons, but it's not impossible to acquire a machine gun if it was manufactured, I think, before 86 or 1986 or some date, and if it had been registered back at that time when they made it illegal. So I think having it in the trust gives you a heads up on that, and probably is not a bad thing to do, just to make sure that you maximize your opportunities for retaining ownership of your guns.
Good points. Sounds interesting. Give out your website if you would and tell people where they can find out more.
Yes, it's www.mclawfirm.com. And we do blogs from periodically, so people can sign up for that. And I'll be doing more on the gun trusts and some of the blogs and so forth. So it's quite an interesting area, and probably a couple of years ago, one that I wasn't contemplating that I would be gravitating towards at the time, but I guess that's what makes the practice of law, as they call it, interesting, because you're always practicing. There's always something new to get into, and so I've found this is a really fascinating area.
It is. It's interesting. And Michael, just before you go here, you're a business attorney, and you do estate planning. I just want to ask you about trust for a moment, because I think a lot of people get confused about this. I mean, my layman's understanding is there are two types of basic trust, revocable and irrevocable, but then there are a whole bunch of different names that you hear people give trust. I guess especially in the irrevocable category, you hear about the spendthrift trust, and then you hear about this trust and that. How many types of trust are there?
You could probably run through a good 10 or 15 without much trouble. There are charitable remainder trusts, charitable annuity trusts, grantor annuity trusts of various types. You've got all basically under a form of the irrevocable trust. The typical one that most, average folks do for either estate planning,
they do a living trust,
estate taxes, is you're exactly right, the living trust.
But the living trust doesn't provide any asset protection benefit. That's just to avoid probate, right?
It's basically it does a little bit when the first spouse dies, because the way these irrevocable family trusts are set up, usually they split into two parts when the first spouse dies. So the assets allocated to the decedent's trust, the first to die, would be a bit of asset protection. Any assets allocated to the survivor's trust, you're absolutely correct, would not have any creditor protection there.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting stuff. Boy, the law is one complicated animal.
Yes.
It sure is. Well, hey, we're going to have you back on to talk about another one of your interesting areas of expertise, and that is private rail cars. Do you want to tell us anything about that just real quickly before we go?
Well, sure. That's we get involved in the acquisition, restoration, and operation of these vintage rail cars. There's a website, www.aaprco.com. In fact, we've got a trip coming up from Omaha to Cheyenne and back to Kansas City in May. So somebody wants to look that up, they'll have a head start when we get together again and talk more about private rail car trips.
How interesting. Boy, I tell you, that is a bygone era that needs to come back. If we could get the government's stranglehold on Amtrak and our railways in the U.S. lifted, it seems like private enterprise could do some really cool, creative stuff. But that remains to be seen if the government will get out of the way.
Well, maybe sometime you'll do one of your shows right on a rail car as we're traveling down the track.
That sounds good to me. Well, hey, thanks for joining us, Michael. We appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting me. And look forward to talking to you soon on that rail car subject, Jason.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye now.
Thank you for joining us today for the Holistic Survival Show, protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times.